What about Arminianism, free will, and Calvinism, determinism? This is an ancient dialogue. Do humans have free will in the midst of this discussion about the gospel? If it's really unconditional, then how does our free will fall into this? Let's talk through it, okay? Here's a parable that I wrote up many years ago. I'm going to read it for us, and just let your imagination go with what it looks like, okay? Once upon a time, there was a middle school boy who found out that the following month there was going to be a dance in the school gymnasium. He already knew whom he wanted to ask, another middle school girl whom he believed was the most lovely of all. One problem, though, was that she did not know who he was. So over the next few months, he left her anonymous flowers or cards as he worked up the courage to ask her to the dance. As the day for the dance drew closer, he knew he had to ask before someone else did. So he approached her and confessed that he was the unknown troubadour and asked her to the dance. After a serious pause and seeing his earnestness, she accepts, and they then plan to go to the dance together. Who is responsible for them going to the dance? His decision to choose her or her decision to accept? This is the age-old question of free will or election, as some people call it. Although this is a metaphor that still breaks down at some point, at least it maintains the idea that the whole ordeal is at least a manner of love, of romance. For many people and how they formulate the gospel, it's not a matter of romance. It's a determination of blind luck or happenstance. So many people formulate the way that they talk about the gospel as if it is actually something that happens divorced of love. And as a result, it's almost like, okay, well, who gets in and who's pushed out is really a matter of throwing a dart against a board while not looking. Oh, you're in. Oh, you're out, you know? And that's not how it is. It's not blind chance who gets in and who gets out. And so we need to reframe the way that we think about some of these aspects of the gospel. One other way of formulating it is that God is like a holy lifeguard. I grew up at the beach. I was a summer lifeguard, and I've been a lifeguard at pools and at camps and lakes and all these other places. And so, what if God's like a holy lifeguard? What is that a better understanding? Here we go. A good lifeguard does not wait until there is consent to rescue someone. If someone is drowning, the lifeguard's job is to jump into the water and save that person because they are drowning under the waters. Plus, here we go. If someone goes unconscious in the water, let's say they pushed the lifeguard away and they went underwater, they swallowed too much water, and now they're unconscious and floating. Within the lifeguard, there is something considered implied consent. When there's implied consent, the lifeguard can actually, okay, you don't want me to save you. I'm going to sit back, and you start drowning. You go unconscious. And legally, there's the idea of implied consent. Okay. And then they go and grab them, pull them in, give them CPR, and hopefully they're resuscitated. And they come to their senses and they say, oh, thank God. I'm so glad that you saved me. God saw that we were, quote, dead in our sins, and therefore has chosen to rescue the whole of the cosmos because it gave its implied consent. That's one way of thinking about it. What if God is a holy lifeguard? And so is it a matter of free will or determinism? It's almost like it's actually the divine's responsibility to rescue the cosmos. And maybe in time, the cosmos will turn its head around and be like, oh, thank you so much. But let's also think about it this way. What about the brain functioning of an addict? That seems like a weird turn, but follow me. To anyone that's done recovery work or cared about someone working through recovery from some addiction, it is well known and documented that the brain functioning of the addict will actually never go away. Once an addict, always an addict. You just perhaps aren't giving into your addiction. But the brain functioning of the addict will never go away and will never not distort their perception of reality. It's going to take constant work for them to see reality as it is, because addiction distorts the way you see everything. The same is true of the sin-addled brain. The addict, the sinner, is never fully free to choose to not be tempted. The same can be said for us as sinners. We are never fully free to choose shalom. So free will is a little bit of a mystery, and maybe it's even completely a misnomer. And God recognizes this reality. We can never not see the world through some distorted version of reality. We never truly have free will that's undistorted, that's not affected by having a sin-addled or addicted brain. And so as such, since we hold and love the addict differently because it has affected the way that they think, so does God hold and love each of us differently. What if God looks at us and says, I know you see the world distortedly. I know that you're addicted to sins, and I know you're addicted to your own self-destruction. And I'm not going to hold that against you. And so if you say no, that you don't want any assistance or help, I know that's the addiction talking. What? So what about my free will? Well, you are not free in love and wisdom if you can still be seduced by something other than God. We are not free to choose. Well, we are not free if we can still choose something that's not God. Once your will has been freed, though, from its bondage to deception, sin, and death, you are then finally free to choose God without infringement. So Martin Luther wrote a very interesting book called On Free Will, Bondage of the Will. Sorry. All right. So the question then becomes, well, what if one day God actually takes away all of our illusions, takes away all of our deceptions, takes away the sin-addled brain, and then we actually have free will in that moment because we're not distorted, we're not under any illusion, we're not dealing with the sin-addicted brain, and actually we can see reality as it actually is. In that sense, we're actually then finally free. And in that moment, we're actually free, because any ability to choose sin actually says we're still a slave to it. And so God is not content for humans to be slaves to sin. So, final paragraph here. A will that is able to say no to God is not actually free. It is still bound to sin and to death. After those are done away with, the will is freed to finally say yes to God after all. Only a will that is completely freed from the temptation to a lesser good than God is actually free. And once completely free, while looking at unconditional love to face, who would want to say no to that? Huh? So this question of free will or determinism, do I have agency in the ability to say yes or no to God? Rhetorically, logically, according to Christian tradition, any rational being that still chooses evil rather than good, destruction rather than salvation, is actually still in bondage and enslaved to illusions and distortions of reality, distortions of love. And so the whole thing completely changes when you start to let the logic of apokatastasis and the reconciliation, restoration, renewal of all things settle into how you think about even free will. Because I think it's true. All of us have a sin-addled brain that chases after and is sometimes seduced by self-destructive tendencies. And so what if God burns off all of that? So then we can actually see God as the infinite goodness, beauty, and truth and love that God actually is. At that point, then we're actually free. And in that moment, who in their right mind would ever, out of free will, choose to say no to infinite love and mercy in the form of infinite goodness, beauty, truth, and love? It really shakes everything up. So this was What About Arminianism, Free Will, and Calvinism, Determinism?